Well, greetings and salutations to the 310 tribe. If you guys can hear me and see me, give me a thumbs up in the audience. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. It sure is cold out there. Hopefully you guys, wherever you are, wherever you're watching from tonight, that you guys got heat, got power, you get access to everything you need, lickies and chewies and warm blankets and you know, whatever you need to stay warm. I know it's been I've been locked in the apartment here for the last few days, and knock on wood, we haven't lost power yet. So I flickered earlier today, and I was like, oh man. So, but anyways, it's cold out there. So hopefully you guys are all staying warm. Yeah, Lisa's like, it's not bad in South Alabama. Well, we can't all live in God's country, can we, Lisa? Can't all live in LA, Lower Alabama. Margarita says it's cold in New Jersey. It's always cold. I've always thought it was cold in New Jersey. 26 in Dallas. Yeah. I don't even know what it is here. 26 in Dallas. It's 19 here. So we're about 5 degrees cooler than where you are. Houston's probably like a muggy 78 or something. Brooke says -4. I don't know. Guys, post how cold it is where you guys are. To the dude, not cold here at all in Phoenix. Yep. Must be nice. I'd like to come visit Phoenix one day. I've been to Phoenix before, but I haven't I didn't know anybody there, so I think I just drove through it. Western Pennsylvania is 14 degrees, 16 in Cleveland, Tennessee, 0 in Mount Sterling. Oh man. 22 in North Idaho. 69 here in Maui, freezing. Man, I love Hawaii. I love Hawaii. It's such a, man, that is such a good time there. Anyways, 18 in Atlanta. 25 muggy. Yeah, Houston. 17 tonight. Hey, Mom. My mom's on. See ya. I think you're going back tomorrow. You'll be ready to go home, I'm sure. I was supposed to go down and see my mom this weekend, but the weather was such that I could get down there. I just couldn't come back. I mean, it's Monday and everything is still kind of frozen over. So I was kind of stuck down here, or stuck in the apartment all weekend. And my kids were going to go with me. It was going to be a big old road trip, and that just kind of fell apart because of the weather. So I'm a little bummed about that. 22 in Tulsa, 46 in southern Utah. Man. Well, I've seen some of the photos from around the U.S., and it looks like tornadoes have gone off in certain places, just the neighborhoods. I think it was in Tennessee that had just like these trees falling everywhere. And I don't know if they exploded or whatever, but it was like it looked like a tornado went through there, and it was just from the freezing cold and the snow and the ice. I don't know I forget what part of Tennessee that was, but yes. Well, tonight, if you didn't have a chance, or today I wrote an article. I wrote it this morning and then just kind of fine-tuned it throughout the day and then published it this afternoon. But it's called From Pax Americana to Fortress America. And if you guys get a chance, I linked it in the title of the subtitle here on YouTube. But yeah, check it out. And I'm going to be talking about that tonight. And actually, I talked to Lee Brainard earlier today, so I didn't have it listed previous to this week, but I just posted on there tonight that I will be on with him Friday night and maybe Joe Hawkins from Prophecy Recon. So maybe the three of us talking about a lot of this stuff, same stuff. But I want to talk about this idea of Pax Americana and where we're going. And I found a video. It's linked in the article from a guy named Jack Chappell. I think he's Canadian kid, but really good. Does a lot of geopolitics and stuff. And I'm a huge history, geopolitics nerd. You know, you guys watch my show. That's kind of where my strong suit is, and what I like to spend the most time talking about, because you know, I don't know, I've always been interested in it. And in fact, that's what my degree is in, international relations. Minored in Russian and then in military history. Like an idiot, I double minored. I should have just turned it into a master's degree. But at the time, I didn't have a mentor in school, and so I didn't know what I was doing. Anyways, neither here nor there. You know, bachelor degree with 156 hours. It's quite the bachelor's degree. Nevertheless, I do enjoy history. I do enjoy geopolitics. Brooke said she took Russian in high school. Oh, I didn't even know they offered it in high school. I think once you get past the Cyrillic alphabet, once you figure that part out, it's not that hard of a language. But yeah, it's just getting past all the letters that don't make any sense, and then there's letters that you recognize in English, but they're not the same pronunciation. So, anyways, so I've always been fascinated with this stuff, and I thought this guy did a pretty good job. So some of it's going to be from his videos, and some of it's going to be from my article, and some other things from X and other places that I found fascinating, and trying to tie all this stuff together and what that means in the context of Bible prophecy. So with that said, let me start off with a quote from Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, and he gave this speech in the space base. I think it's in South Texas, where SpaceX is based out of. And he's talking about modernization. And what's interesting is that the Secretary of Defense at the time, Rumsfeld, had the same kind of a speech back in early September 2001. So right before 9/11, he gave a speech talking about modernization. And yeah, I think September the 10th actually was a Monday. And he was talking about that there was $1.2 trillion unaccounted for in the Pentagon budget. And, you know, got to remember at the time too, they were transitioning between digital systems and paper systems, or from paper to digital. And it's not to say that all that money was just gone. It's just they couldn't account for it. And then the next day, obviously 9/11 happened. And then, you know, the focus had really dropped off of that for the next, you know, good 5 or 6 years. So, so all that to say this. So here's Pete Hegseth, and he says, in modern warfare, the fastest innovator and iterator will be the winner, and no one can out-innovate an American entrepreneur who has been liberated from the constraints of stifling bureaucracy. End quote. Well, so Rumsfeld said a very similar thing back in the day. He was talking about the bureaucracy and how things had been we were always preparing to fight the last war. And if you go back to the early 90s, they had this the last thing called the Last Supper. And I think it was right when Clinton came in, and he cut a lot of the military, he cut a lot of the defense spending, he cut a lot of the defense industries that had been providing, you know, weapons and systems and stuff. And there was only a handful of contractors that remained, and the ones that were cut, obviously, I think a lot of them were absorbed into these bigger ones. So that's why we have these major military industrial complex type organizations today, rather than, you know, 20 little ones. Now there's like 4 big ones, and ours more than 4, but you know, back then it was there was a lot. And so some of the issues that they faced with acquisitions, the acquisition process, as well as just the developing an idea, coming up with an idea on a paper napkin. Okay, I want a jet that looks like this, or I want a tank that looks like this, or I want a missile that does this, or I want a machine gun that does this. Is that by the time it goes from the idea to in the hand of the soldier on the battlefield, it's often, you know, 20 years. it's very antiquated, very slow process, very bureaucratic, and this is problematic, especially in today's age where things are, moving at lightning speed, and you've got AI doubling basically every 4 months. You've got computer processing, data processing is doubling every 2 years. I mean, it's things are moving at such a rapid pace today that our old system of doing things isn't working anymore. And I think you can take that same kind of concept and kind of take it across the entirety of what we're going to talk about tonight, and you'll see where this is all going. So some of the things that this guy Jack Chappell brought out in the video, I'm summarizing a lot of this stuff, but I like how he put it together. So that's why I'm going to kind of lead off with that before I even get into my article. But he says empires don't always collapse. They evolve through excisis, which is like the shedding of an old shell for a stronger one. You might see that in a crab or some other, snails or crawfish, not crawfish. I can't think of those little things you put in your tank that have shells, and they have what are they called? The little crabs that go in the shell, and then they have to get a bigger shell the bigger they get. Same thing with crabs. They always they outgrow their shell. And so sometimes empires don't collapse, but they evolve. And right now the U.S. is in the hermit crab. Thank you, Richard. Right now the U.S. is in its third iteration or its third version of this empire. And we're looking to transition into the fourth. So the four versions of America, the four empires of America, if you can put it that way, is the first one was from about 1800 to 1890s, and this is called the Manifest Destiny. And basically, dirt equals power. If you could put a fence around it and you can claim it as your own, that is claiming for America. And we saw this massive expansion across America from the East Coast all the way through the Midwest and, to the Louisiana Purchase and even out to California and up through the Pacific Northwest, up to Seward's Folly, up to Alaska when we bought that. And this was this idea of expanding out across our nation. And it was basically land-focused continental expansion in a nutshell. And the second empire was from 1898 to 1945. And this is where our focus on power and what power meant changed from dirt to access. And that obviously caused us to focus more on a blue water navy and then trying to find and access ports around the world that we could trade with. And obviously 1945, we know that that's at the end of the Second World War. And that launches us into the third empire, which we are at the tail end of today. And this is the invisible, kind of the invisible power of hegemony, of power through influence. And that influence came in the power of the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency. It came in the form of influence through NATO, Bretton Woods, the Marshall Plan, the shift to diplomatic solutions through the United Nations, and then also through corporate America, through the goods and services that we provided in the industries that we sold across the world, whether it was the automobile industry or Hollywood or all of those things. Thank you, Kevon. Appreciate that. And so that meant that the standards equals power. And so we set the standards around the world, and then that was the tune that everybody had to dance to. Now, as we enter into the fourth version of America, it's kind of part of Plan 2027. It's a mix of plans, but you can kind of see the pattern forming across what Trump is trying to do. And it's called the selective walled garden model. So high tech, resource secure, orbital, AI dominant, and it means that essentiality becomes power. So why the shift from the third the old way of doing things to now this new way of doing things. And a lot of it has to do with the national debt, that we're now 38 trillion in debt. Our dollar is highly inflated. A lot of other nations around the world are beginning to look at other options. We've got BRICS, you've got cryptocurrencies, blockchain based, whatever, all these different currencies and stuff that are out there. The US dollar is not simply the only game in town anymore. And not only that, when Russia invaded Ukraine a couple of years ago, we implemented this actions against Russia through the SWIFT, which is we basically seized up all their money flowing through the SWIFT system. And so a lot of people, a lot of other nations around the world, even allies, were looking at us like, when we look at all the assets that we would, or when other nations look at all the money that they have tied up with the US dollar, they're thinking, well, if we ever cross the United States, they can simply just freeze our assets. That began to scare people. So we weaponized the dollar against Russia. But in doing that, our allies and everybody else began to say, well, I'm going to diversify my money. I don't want it all tied up with, with America, because if they can do that to Russia, they can do that to us. So, other factors are that the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus any of the additional ones they've had, their growth, population growth is outpacing the traditional G7 nations like almost 4 to 1. So the shift in the global GDP is going to be moving in a particular direction, and it seems to be moving away from the old guard, the industrial nations of the G7, and moving towards now these emerging markets. And then, also the polarization in the United States has gotten to kind of an extreme here recently between basically Trump and all the other, the entire Democrat Party. And so people don't like uncertainty. They don't like this, extreme swings between Democrats and Republicans. And it presents a very, it produces a lot of uncertainty for markets to invest here. And then, it wasn't just this polarization against Trump, but you look at things that the Biden administration did, like the absolute fiasco of a withdrawal from Afghanistan, the, basically facilitating or allowing the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, just all the things that were happening, the open borders, the weaponized immigration, human trafficking, flow of drugs, cartel power, all that stuff was just really making America look very weak. And so people were not wanting to park their money here. So all of those things have been really causing the dollar to tank even faster than it had already been. So Trump comes in and he wants to shift the direction. And this is in the form of economic securitization. Now, securitization is kind of the pooling of assets together and using that as leverage. Mostly it deals with like bonds and debts and things like that. But in this idea, it's dealing more with assets, hard assets that we have, not liquid assets. And he is doing that through a number of different ways. So the first one is this 10 to 20% baseline tariffs that he imposed kind of right off the bat. And he's using tariffs to force these companies that had moved all of their factories and manufacturing stuff overseas. He's making it more expensive for them to work overseas than it is in the United States. So if you had a car factory in Mexico and you could pay your workers, I don't know, $15 a day, and they have no benefits, no nothing. And it's going to cost you 10 to 20% more to ship that same car back over to the United States to sell it in Texas or to sell it in Arizona or, wherever. Then eventually that company is just going to say, we're losing money here. We're just going to keep our factories here, or we're going to move our factories back to the US and we'll make more money that way. So that's one asset. And then obviously we've seen him use tariffs as leverage against countries like Canada here just recently. Thank you, Marine Mom. To force them to kind of kill this deal with China, where they were going to let China come in and basically flood the market with cheap electric vehicles. Well, Trump's like, yeah, that's not going to happen. I'm just going to impose a across the board 100% tariff on all Canadian goods. So, so Mark Carney came out and kind of walked back all of his tough talk there at the Davos, and now he's flipping the script on that. So I mean, the Canadian, it's somewhere between 3 and 17% that the U.S. sells to Canada, but it's like 70 to 80% of what Canada sells to the United States. So it was going to be a massive, massive hit for the Canadian economy. And so I believe that Mark Carney absolutely had to walk that back and kill that deal with China. So I don't know where that stands today, but I know he walked it back, but I don't know, that was a lot of just talk earlier. So I don't know what the reality is going to be here in the next few months. Next is minerals, rare earth minerals. Obviously this is driving the friction between the US and NATO over Greenland. The NATO chief came out and said to the EU leaders there at Davos, thank you, Deborah, that Europe absolutely cannot defend itself without the United States. They were idiots for even thinking about that. He goes, you're living in a dream world if you think that we can even be remotely ready to take on the world for whatever comes to the EU without the American support. And so you think about it, from 1945 through really just here in the last few years, in Trump's first term, Europe didn't have to spend any money on their own defense. You think about how big our defense budget is, how much of our budget is constituted with the U.S. defense, and it's a lot. And the U.S. In this time, in the third iteration of the Third Empire, from 1945 to just here in the last year, we were kind of overexposed around the world. We were everywhere. We had bases all over the world. We had to fund all those bases and keep the money flowing, to keep the soldiers going, the sailors, the airmen. And thank you, Watch for Jesus. And it costs a lot of money. And the same thing happened with Rome back in the 2nd and 3rd centuries of the Roman Empire, that they had gotten so big, it just gets too expensive. You keep expanding out and expanding out and expanding out, and you've got to keep all that money flowing to keep everything working. So there's a shift back from Trump to not do that. He's not necessarily an isolationist, but he's not an adventurist either. But the minerals come in to play very bigly, as he would put it, because a lot of these, we'll get to the importance of the minerals per se, but Greenland is strategic in that regard, and so is Venezuela. And again, I'll talk about Venezuela here in a second, but this is rare earth minerals, or as Trump would say, the minerals aren't rare. It's the process of getting them out of the earth is what's hard. It's difficult to do. But they're incredibly valuable when it comes to the direction that this nation is going, and really where this world is going. And so another shift in this economic plan is to move from the cheapest to the most secure supply lines, that supply chains that exist. So what that means is that, back in the day, we would buy from whoever made the cheapest goods, 1990, I don't know what exact year, but China got the most favored nation status. And prior to that, in the 80s, it was Taiwan. And before that, it was Japan. And we would just we bought junk from them. Basically you would buy stuff, and let's say we bought 100 of whatever, and you could guarantee like a percentage of that would not even be functional because it's made cheap. If you go to Walmart, you go to Target, you go to any of these box stores, big box stores, 99% of the stuff in there is made in China, right? I mean, it's usable, but it's kind of garbage at the same time. And we can buy it cheap because it doesn't cost them anything to pay their workers, so like $3 a day, and no breaks, and they're working like 12 hours. So we buy a lot of the stuff from there, but we're moving away from that. We would rather pay for more money for something, but have a secure supply chain, so that in the event of another world war, we're not beholden to anybody for medicines, for vitamins, for dog food or any kind of food, or you know what I mean? Like, we're not beholden to any other country that's going to be able to kind of put us over a barrel and make us do their bidding, because they hold all the cards in this one particular area, whether it's computer chips or it's medicines or anything else. And I think we learned that lesson during COVID in 2020. And then the next thing is the shift to is called the AI stack strategy. And so what the AI stack strategy means is that we want the next thing, that the next major thing that really secures the US hegemon around the world is selling this AI stack. And that means you're selling the hardware, which is like the chips, like NVIDIA, the software, you know, all the different kind of apps and programs that everybody uses for, you know, whatever kind of business you're in. You're selling the infrastructure, which is the data center, these massive data centers. And included in the data centers is, you know, obviously the energy capacities that are now being looked at in a couple different ways. One is they're looking at investing in these small nuclear modular reactors, these small modular nuclear reactors that, you know, you'd have a small reactor next to like a massive data center. And that data center then would not be pulling energy off the grid, but would get all the energy from this reactor. Another one is what I talked about I don't know if it was last week, I think it was last week, where Elon Musk is looking to or I was with Scott Townsend. He's launching all of these, you know, satellites into space. I think he launched 160 something here just in 2025. And putting solar panels on those things and finding a way to harvest solar energy from the sun, from low Earth orbit, straight back to the Earth via like radio waves. And you would have a ground base that, you know, these big dishes that basically just absorb the energy. And then from that, you would pipe that energy out to wherever. And so that's where another factor where Greenland comes into play. It will play very large with regard to what they want to do with space. And then the last part of it is obviously the model, the brains of it, and that's the artificial intelligence. We want to control all four aspects of that and then sell those as packages or stacks. And so if anybody around the world wants to get online, they have to go through our stacks, right? So not only is he doing that, but he's looking at using these data centers and these satellites and making them national security projects. And the same thing with the hardware. So NVIDIA, I think the government owns like 9.9% interest into the company. It's sort of something similar to like state capitalism in a way, but it also is kind of like picking the winners in this as well, because at this point in time, we want to dominate in a particular area and we want to dominate in this field. So we're going to throw all the chips in, so to speak, in a basket, and that happens to be NVIDIA, it happens to be SpaceX, because they're able to they have reusable rockets, they're able to keep launching satellites into space, and, you know, entering the energy market from both the modular nuclear reactors as well as from solar energy, is two ways to absolutely guarantee energy dominance going forward. Now, speaking of, you know, the space and all that, you know, obviously we want to have orbital dominance. And, you know, in the ancient world, in the Roman times, hey, thank you, dog, your disciple. That's the Dave. Hey, brother. I'd love to have you on at some point. Love to have you come on. I'll reach out to you. You would have, in the Roman era times, Mediterranean, the Romans looked at the Mediterranean. They didn't look at it just like a giant body of water. They looked at it like a road that can take them anywhere. It was called Mare Nostrum. It was RC, and it gave them freedom to go wherever and expand in whatever direction they wanted to go once they dominated the Mediterranean. Well, we're going to take that. We're going to take the cislunar area, so the space between the Earth and the Moon, and we're going to make that RC. We want to dominate that. And the only way we can dominate that is through volume. And that means going to the moon, setting up some type of permanent lunar station on the southern part of the moon, and mining for, valuable minerals and things there, and so we're going to be the only game in town when it comes to that. And so part of the deal, and part of how, Musk is able to secure a $200 billion financing from the government to continue funding SpaceX, is that he also has to put in, a lot of these satellites have to be mil-spec ready. They have to be compatible and, ultimately weaponized, which is going to feed into the Golden Dome. So when these satellites can be, in the event of a major conflict, you have hundreds of satellites over Earth that can shoot down, let's say China or Russia launches a nuclear weapon against us, we can shoot them down in the boost phase. So even before they leave the atmosphere, these things can get shot down from space. That erases mutually assured destruction, which had basically guided us all the way through the Cold War. And instead of having the most missiles, now we have the best shield. And this is something, so what Israel did with Iron Dome, they did that from a terrestrial base, land bases, and now we're looking to do that from space, to shoot these things down from space, so they can never get out of even Earth's atmosphere on the way over to hit us, which is why Greenland again becomes very strategic. So not only that, but we want to control space. That's going to be our Mare Nostrum. That's going to be our sea. And in the lunar South Pole, which the Artemis mission, I think, is getting ready to launch here. They're going to do a orbit around the moon here in February, but we're looking to claim particular areas from mining, helium-3 mining, setting up zoning laws, as it were, for future space economy. That's kind of where they're going with all this. Hey, thank you, James. Appreciate that. So that's kind of in a nutshell where the U.S. is going with a lot of this stuff. And, Trump is looking long-term down the road. How does he make America great for the next 150 years, 250 years? And in my article, Blind Spot, that I wrote, this is again, one of the big Achilles heels for a lot of these really, really smart, intelligent leaders that we have. And a lot of them are Christian. They may buy into this idea of post-millennialism or amillennialism, where, we're just going to be here for centuries and centuries going forward. And, we need to kind of get ahead of the curve on kind of dominating the planet. They don't see, or they don't take Bible prophecy seriously, which is, their blind spot. That's where they're going to be caught off guard when the rapture does happen. So all that to say is that the U.S. now is kind of in this fourth iteration of our nation's founding. And, I talk a little bit about this as well in my article. Let me pull that up real fast. When we look at the U.S., right? We went from the Revolutionary War every time. So this is kind of talking about the fourth turning point. Not only are we in this fourth empire, as it were, but this is also the time that a lot of the global leaders and people at Davos and the World Economic Forum, United Nations, etc., this is where they look at what they call the fourth turning point. And the fourth turning point is essentially a cycle, part of a cycle that we go through as a nation, an empire, kingdom, whatever. And supposedly, if you could go through any major empire that's been around for more than 400 or 500 years, you can see kind of very similar cycles. But generally, every 80 years, there's some type of catastrophic event or major change that causes that empire, that nation, kingdom, what have you, to shift directions and take a different course. And so we can see that very clearly here with America. If you go from the founding in 1776 and you fast forward 80 years, you get to the American Civil War. From the American Revolution, right? We broke away from the world's superpower at the time, the British Empire. We went from 13 colonies to these United States. Fast forward 80 years, we went from, at the end of the Civil War, we went from these United States to the United States. It was no longer this states that we are a nation, but if we need to break away, we can. And there was a little bit of that, more autonomy, I think, early on. And after the Civil War, it was kind of cemented, like, no, you're not breaking away now or ever, so that's the big shift there in the Civil War. Fast forward 80 years, you get to World War II. And I think in my article, I misspoke. I put the World War I as 80 years, but it's really World War II. But in World War I, 20 years before World War II, we saw the end of a bunch of major empires, the end of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the end of the Ottoman Empire, the end of the German Second Reich. In 1912, we had the end of the Qing dynasty in China. 1917, the end of Tsarist Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution. And at the end of World War I, they came up with the League of Nations. And so fast forward 20 years from that, you have World War II. We had the end of the German Third Reich. We had the end of fascist Italy, the end of Imperial Japan. It also put the nails in the coffin of the Dutch, the British, and the French colonial empires. It gave birth to the United Nations. It gave birth to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. And it cemented global hegemony over the world. And subsequently, what followed was the Cold War with the Soviet Union. So we saw these major changes every 80 years, and it's really like 80 years plus or minus 10 years. And you fast forward to today, and we're in that same window right now. So it makes sense that a lot of these things are changing in the world in ways that people that don't study history or don't follow geopolitics have a hard time of really understanding why things are happening the way they're happening. In a nutshell, wrapping all that up, is that technology is moving too fast. Geopolitics are moving too fast. Everything is moving too fast for the old way of doing things. The old order of things is not working anymore. And, Trump put that on display when he went to Davos and basically laid it all out to the EU leaders there, saying, hey, you guys aren't going to dominate. We're dominating. You guys need to get your act together. You need to grow up, blah, blah, blah. And so that's kind of a lot of what's driving what he's doing. And I know a lot of people think he's just operating out of chaos, but I think he's really thought a lot of this stuff through. And he's got a lot of smart people around him. They're guiding him into these kind of policies in politics about taking things and having multiple effects on one event. So Venezuela, taking out Maduro, but keeping the regime in place. He didn't want to repeat the mistakes he made in Iraq back in 2003 when we invaded Iraq. We basically fired all of their government, and that allowed for the rise of these militias and all the terrorist factions and everything to rise up and basically give Americans hell for the next 8 years, fighting in Iraq, fighting in places like Fallujah and Ramadi and Tikrit and Mosul. And that allowed for ISIS to come out, to become a thing, and Al-Qaeda to flourish there, et cetera. So we didn't want to make that same mistake. So they kept the government in place, Maduro's vice president, and a lot of their leadership is still in charge running the place, but they have to dance to the tune we lay down. And, I think that they will eventually probably swap out the government with whoever, I forget the guy's name, that basically won the presidency the first time, but Maduro wouldn't hand over power. He was in exile, I think, in Spain. So I don't know if he's coming back or what his deal is, but I'm assuming they're going to have elections here pretty soon, as soon as they start cleaning up the government there. But by taking out Maduro, they basically cut Cuba off. And now in China, China within the last year, I think it's the last year, Xi Jinping has gotten rid of like 20 of his top generals, and here like 8 of them here in the last few months, and even his closest guys here in the last few weeks, because of the failures. I think a large part has to do with the failures in Venezuela, that these early detection radar systems and air defense systems that they had sold Maduro, they didn't work. The Americans just went through them like a hot knife through butter, like it was nothing. And so, it's a lot of egg on the face. And now nobody wants to buy those systems. Same thing with the Russians. So, the U.S., if anything, Venezuela was really just a show of force, showing, hey, if we want to come in hard, we can come in hard. And we're going to use you guys as an example. But by doing that, the U.S. is exerting dominance back over the Western Hemisphere. It's showing everybody in the world, hey, do not mess with us. We are the biggest, baddest, toughest kids on the block. And we have no problems using our power. We don't want to use it, but if we have to, we will. And so we did. We did with Venezuela. And he had, again, air defense systems from Russia and China that basically were rendered useless. Now, all of that to say that where we are today and why things are happening, even the subtitle from my article, I put, how turning Minneapolis into Mogadishu signals troubling changes ahead. So with all of the success that the Trump administration has had, obviously there are people that just hate him. They hate him. It doesn't matter what he does, what he says. He could cure cancer tomorrow, and he'd be criticized for putting cancer doctors out of business. I mean, like, it doesn't matter. He can't win either way with these people. And the reason is, let me read my bluff here. With the impossible third election of Donald J. Trump, the political left knows they are losing bigly and are desperate. They are very desperate right now. And the changes Team Trump are making is not superficial like with previous Republican administrations. No, these are substantive, foundational, and will permanently remove the funding and power base from political leftists of all stripes now and for forever. But the leftists aren't going to take it lying down. They're going to, if they can't have their own version of America, no one can, and they'd rather watch it burn than watch MAGA ever succeed. And then the tragic irony in all of this resistance that the left thinks that they are driving in places like Minneapolis and Los Angeles is not a disruption to Donald J. Trump's plans, but they are accelerants. And this has Satan's fingerprints all over it. So let's play devil's advocate for a second. You're Satan, and let's say it's the turn of the 20th century. You don't know when the Lord's coming back. You don't know. I mean, you're the most intelligent created being in history. He was the chief of the angels, right? The chief, the head, the anointed cherub that covers, Ezekiel 28, I believe. And he has been there from the beginning. He's seen mankind. He has witnessed creation. He knows how to play humans like fiddles. So he's seen all this. He knows that Jesus is coming back. He just didn't know. He doesn't know when exactly, because no man knows the day or the hour. Nobody knows, right? We can know the season, but we only know the season due to the abundance of signs that are available. But for most of the last 2,000 years, nobody knew. They didn't know because Israel wasn't back in their land. And, obviously, Satan is not a dummy. So in 1897, when he sees Theodore Herzl begin convening this first Zionist Congress there in Europe, he can start to see the winds are changing, right? Something is changing. And so then in 1917, you had the Balfour Declaration. In 1920, the San Remo Conference. And you basically, Jews were allowed to move back, repatriate to their homeland, their ancient homeland. And so if you're Satan and you're watching all this, you begin to do what? You begin to stir up anti-Semitism in Europe. You begin to stir up a young ex-soldier named Adolf Hitler, who was a painter, house painter, who is mentored by just the wrong people. And he ends up learning how to whip up a crowd and speak. And he learns about Arianism and about all these things. And he's blaming it all on the Jews. So he starts to get a following. And then next thing you know, he's in charge of the government, 1933. And between 1933 and 1945, we have what we know in history as the Nazi, the Jewish Holocaust, perpetrated by the Third Reich, killing somewhere around 6 million Jews, trying to exterminate them from all of the earth if they could have. And at the outset of that, you would think, oh, well, Satan is winning. Satan is winning this plan. But God had a way. God had a plan. And he used that to foment enough world sympathy for them to vote in November of 1947. Resolution, I can't remember the exact resolution number. I think it was 242 or anyways, whatever that resolution was, it allowed for the Jews to go back to their homeland, for there to be a partitioning of a Jewish and an Arab state. And so now you're Satan and you're watching this, and now you see in that was November, so by May 14th, 1948, Theodore Herzl, man, I'm blanking on people's names tonight, the first president of Israel. Well, he declares their independence, declares their nation is going to be called Israel. And, President Truman was the first world leader to recognize them as a country, sovereign nation. And so Satan knows now, okay, now we're in the end times. We're in the end game. And he begins ramping up, stirring up and whipping up Islam, right? As the main antagonist of the Jewish people and of Israel. He's doing that through the Sunni and the Shia. Not only that, but he's also kept anti-Semitism ramping up throughout the world, and it was veiled as anti-Zionism. And then we saw in 2023 that anti-Zionism is really anti-Semitism. They're one and the same. So Satan knows he's in the end times, and then that gets even put on fast forward. David Ben-Gurion, thank you, Blake. We see the reunification of Jerusalem in 1967 in the 6-Day War, and now he knows, okay, this is where it's going. He ramps up the moral collapse of Western civilization in the 1960s and 70s and 80s with hedonism, secularism, Eastern mysticism, commercialism, all the isms are just on steroids in the U.S. and the West, and it's really beginning to tear the Western civilization apart. At the same time, simultaneously to all this stuff, is the rapid advancements in technology, going back to the splitting of the atom with the Manhattan Project, with the discovery of the DNA double helix in, I think, 1950 or 51, the advancements in computers from really the late 50s onward. Technology has just been advancing on every front you could think of, in every sector of science and in academia. Science is, technology has been just racing forward. And that's been really kind of the way it's been from then until today. And we're at this like fever pitch right now with technology, and especially with the advancements of artificial intelligence. And I was, a couple of days ago, I was watching, rewatching some old X-Files, like the first season, the first couple of episodes, maybe like episode 4 or whatever. And they were talking about AI then, that was still theoretical. I was like, wow, just how fast, and even like stealth technology, stealth planes was all still theoretical back then in the early 90s. So things have really just gone into fever pitch, right? With technology. We've seen since the 2000, we've seen the alignment of basically the Gog and Magog players, and at least the well-known ones, right? Turkey, Russia, and Iran. Well, Putin comes in 2000. Tayyip Erdogan comes into play in 2001, and the Ayatollahs have been in power there in Iran since '79. So the three main players are now kind of triangulating around Israel, as it were. Thank you, Rick Baggett. Appreciate that. So it's this, we see the Gog and Magog alignments coming together. It's not perfect just yet, right? We don't know exactly how things are going to play out with Iran. Estimates are 30,000 plus Iranians killed. I mean, we don't know exactly what the true number is just yet, but we know the crackdown's been brutal. We also know the U.S. is moving their carrier fleets into the area. We know Israel is at the same time taking out the remnants of Hezbollah and trying to cut off all the proxies once and for all from being fingers that Iran can use to reach out and touch Israel. And we've seen the current financial systems are beginning to crumble. We had a big, economic crash in 2001, right after 9/11. We had another one in 2008, and they just keep happening faster and faster. And it's not just the U.S., but in Greece, collapsed back in 2010 or 11. Other countries have had financial collapses. And the thing is, it doesn't even have to be the U.S. that collapses. It could be some other country that we do any kind of significant trading with. They collapse. That could have a domino effect in ways that we don't fully understand just yet. And then the last aspect of this, and you're Satan again, you're watching all this stuff playing out, and you see Christendom is probably at its weakest point that it's ever been. We're the most fractured we've ever been as a body of believers. I mean, there's estimates of like 35 to 40,000 different denomination and sects and different, splinter groups and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying they're all Christian. I'm just saying they claim to be Christian. So Christianity is very, very divided. And so, Satan knows. He knows that he has got to move fast. And so and here's the thing, I don't know what role the United States plays in terms of the beast kingdom. My initial thoughts were that the U.S. collapses at the rapture of the church, because, even if you remove 10% of the population from the U.S., and it's not just concentrated in the lower echelons, but across the economic spectrum, doctors, lawyers, cops, military, engineers, truck drivers, nurses, teachers, 10% out of that whole thing, and you're collapsing the system. I don't see how the U.S. doesn't collapse in that. But it could be that the U.S. is being built up so that when we do collapse, that the Europeans can come in and just take it over. So if the rapture happens, and not if, but when the rapture happens, and there is a kind of a collapsing of the United States, it may be that there are European, or it could be Canadian, could be Russian, whoever could come in and basically start taking over and securing locations in the United States that we can't secure ourselves anymore. Sensitive military sites, nuclear sites, missile silos, highly strategic research labs and facilities, gold reserves, oil reserve. I mean, there's a ton of different things that other nations could act upon if the U.S. was not didn't have the capacity to secure themselves, because we're in a state of kind of chaos, right? And for example, if the rapture happens during Trump's administration here, you would have guys like Marco Rubio would be out. He'd be gone. Mike Huckabee. I'm sure there's probably, like, out of his staff, there's probably 50% are Christian, some capacity, way, shape, or form, are believers. So you take those out, then you take out a percentage of the military, you take out a percentage of law enforcement, Secret Service, everything. And the U.S., they're basically going to have to go down into bunkers and secure themselves until the chaos passes over. In that time, I think other nations that didn't lose as much or lose as many would take advantage of that chaos, right? Thank you, Kathy. Take advantage of that chaos, take advantage of the U.S. inability to respond globally, because we don't have the manpower, or we don't have the leadership, or we don't have, XYZ to go out. And that's why I kind of believe that the Gog and Magog conflict happens between the rapture and the 70th week. I think it happens during this time period because the U.S. cannot respond. And I could be wrong. I'm not saying thus saith Pete, you know, that it's just kind of the way I see it from a military standpoint. You take advantage of the fog of war, as it were, put it in Clausewitzian terms. So we're in this window of time now where I think Satan is building the U.S. up very rapidly because we're really the only ones that can do it. And to a point that I made a couple of weeks ago, I think I was with Scott again, Scott Townsend, that you think about it this way, you know, we know that God is the one that appoints leaders, raises up leaders, takes out leaders. Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar, I believe, made that statement. Same with Daniel, made that in Daniel chapter 2. And we see in Acts 17:26 that God sets the times and the boundaries of nations. He's the one that appoints those. But I think in there is wiggle room for Satan to manipulate leaders and to manipulate situations. That we see that in Luke chapter 4, where Jesus is in the wilderness and Satan has tempted him. He takes him up on a high mountain, shows him all the kingdoms of the world, says, these were all been given to me. I can give them to whoever I want. Just bow down and worship me. And so we know Jesus rebukes him with scripture. But Jesus doesn't refute his claim that he makes. He rebukes him for offering him that in the first place. But he doesn't say, no, you don't have that authority to give those nations. Because I think for whatever degree that God has allowed Satan autonomy to work and do what he does here, Satan has some ability to control and manipulate these territories and lands. So with that said, I think that at the rapture, the U.S. is taken out. Now, we're not gone. We're not erased from the map or anything like that. But whatever emerges after the rapture is not going to be the United States of today. It's going to be whatever the new version of America will look like after that. It will not be a constitutional republic. It will be Fortress America. So I think that we're rapidly militarizing and mechanizing and digitizing our current world, and in particular the United States, for this eventuality. And so the left right now, they're protesting, they're organizing very, very organized, almost insurgent-like activities against ICE and Homeland Security and Border Patrol. And they think that they're doing something productive, but in reality, what they're doing is they're accelerating Trump's need to militarize law enforcement, to militarize all of the security apparatuses within the United States government, which is exactly what Satan wants, right? And so I kind of coined this term, I think I'm the only one to coin it. I don't know if anybody else has ever said it, but I call it Hegelionomics, after the Hegelian dialectic, which is, you know, the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, but then adding the economics aspect to it, that they're doing this. And I define it as this, and again, I'm kind of fine-tuning this definition. Hegelionomics interprets economic history and policy as a dialectical cycle of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, in which contradictions within a system drive crisis and transform it into a new predetermined socio-economic order. So they're doing the very thing that is going to result in what they fear the most, you know? And so we know that the Hegelian dialectic was first put forth by the 19th century German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who was looking at it from an idealistic position, but that idea was something that Karl Marx would take and kind of twist it and use it for his own new burgeoning philosophy of communism, you know, or Marxism. And so Hegel used this dialectic to explain the development of ideas and consciousness and history. And Marx flips Hegel's right side up and makes the dialectic about material things and not philosophical things. And he did that because Marx doesn't believe that history was driven by ideas. It was driven by material conditions and class struggle. So what did Karl Marx want? In the end, he wanted a stateless, classless world that all lived under one system, a communism, like a communist utopia. Well, I think that it's going to result in that, but not in a communist utopia. Obviously, we know the last kingdom is the kingdom of the beast, the last human kingdom, as it were. And so the very things that they're doing right now and protesting in all the corruption and the fraud and all that, it's driving us into the arms of the world of Revelation 13. We're driving into that very scenario where we end up with this nation, this kingdom that they ask about in verse 4 of Revelation 13. They're like, who is like the beast? Who can make war against the beast? The beast, this final kingdom is going to be so powerful. It will make every empire before that ever existed before look like children playing with, little building blocks. This is going to be a very terrifying government. That's the final world government. And, if we could see kind of now, just look at what we did with Maduro, that is even nothing compared to what's coming. And this chaos that the left is driving, because they're progressives and they're leftists, or they're pairing up with, radical Islamists, and they're environmentalists and the LGBTQ plus whatever crowd, basically all the different radicalized ideologues out there are driving this security apparatus and making it into this armored porcupine that is going to be basically untouchable. And they're creating their own nightmare, is what I'm trying to say. So that's kind of the idea behind that. And again, Trump administration, out of wanting to do something right, are actually creating the systems and the processes and the weapons that will be absconded by the beast kingdom because of the rapture of the church. And so when you look at all the different national defense strategies, if you read through all the intel briefs, none of them ever talk about the rapture of the church as being something to take into consideration. They never address it. They never talk about it. They just act like it doesn't exist. And I think that's why it's the perfect crisis, because on the face of it, if you weren't a Christian and somebody was telling you about the rapture, it would sound ridiculous. It would. I mean, even Chuck Missler said that. Chuck Missler was like, he compared it to like quantum mechanics. It's like, I forget who he was quoting, but he was saying like, quantum mechanics, when you think about it, or quantum physics, when you think about it, it's the most ridiculous thing. He goes, the only thing that it has going for is that it's absolutely true. So the same thing with the rapture. The rapture is one of the most preposterous ideas ever, read or studied in Scripture. And yet it's absolutely true. And it's the one thing that's going to catch the world completely off guard, because they just refuse to believe that's going to happen. But, Satan's obviously not a dummy. He sees all this coming. He's not telling the people that work for him, like Soros and Klaus Schwab and all these clowns. Obviously they don't believe it, but he believes it. And that's why he's driving the world to the way it is today. So, but, as for the church, this is a time for us to be very, very, our confidence should be through the roof right now. And our optimism should be through the roof. Not because we enjoy seeing the world in chaos and turmoil, but we know that we're that much closer to the blessed hope. We know that that Christ and he promised himself, and then we see this reiterated with Paul and others in the New Testament, that the church is not destined for wrath. And, from the first seal to the last bowl judgment, it's all wrath. It's all wrath. Don't buy into these pre-wrath nonsense that only the last bowl judgments are. No, it's all wrath. I don't know exactly how the seals will play out. I know they're open chronologically, but how did they play out on the earth? I don't know. But from the first seal to the last bowl judgment, it's all wrath. And, during the seal judgments, that's a quarter of the world's population. During the trumpet judgments, that's a third of the world, a third of what's left over from the quarter that had already been taken out. So by the midpoint of the tribulation of Daniel's 70th week, you got half the world's population is gone. It's dead. It's all wrath. It's all wrath. Jesus is the only one found worthy in the entire universe that was able to go up to the Father and take the scroll out of his hand and open the seals. And from the first seal to the last, it's all wrath. So anyways, all that to say, we're watching the world, we're watching the infrastructure being, in fact, I don't even think we're seeing the infrastructure anymore. I think we're seeing the kind of the final coats of paint being put on with how much is happening now and how fast things are happening. And I expect that this year, like I said last year, I said this year is going to be even crazier than last year. And I'm optimistic if the Final Four that Tyler and I did a few years ago, if that window is valid and our interpretation of Hosea 5:15 through 6:3 is accurate, then I always held to a 33 AD crucifixion. So for me, 2033 is 2,000 years. So I don't know if it's this year, but I do know I'm pretty confident that 2033 plays a role in the 70th week somehow. It's either at the beginning, the middle, or the end. So, I'm not setting dates. I'm not selling my house or, moving to a mountaintop, wearing white robes, jumping up in the air, trying to get something going. I'm just going to keep doing what he's called me to do and living my life here and, being faithful in what he's called me to do until then. So whether it's this year or it's next year or the year after, we don't know. But I would be remiss to say, we always talk about, passages about when Paul's talking about in the last days, people will want to have their ears tickled, and we always kind of equate that to the Joel Osteens or the Steve Furtick's or all these guys that are, health, wealth, and glory and name it, claim it stuff. But I also think that tickling of ears is also people that want to be told it's this year or it's on this date. And I look at that prophet Joshua that was, came out in September and said it's going to happen on this whatever day it was, September 23rd or something. That's a form of tickling the ears. People want to hear that. And I mean, my channel would be huge if I were to go out and just say, it's going to be this year. Absolutely. And, if I just was really, over the top with this stuff, but because I don't say that, I don't mind being a small channel. Like that doesn't bother me at all, but I'm not going to go out and tickle people's ears just because they want to hear something. And a lot of people have gotten frustrated with me over the years because I did a Lamb and Lion interview I did it back in December, but it aired just a couple of days ago. I said, look, it could be 10 years from now. And people got upset about that. I'm like, sorry. I mean, I don't claim to know. We just came up with a theory and said, look, this is kind of, and you go back and watch the video. We make the same disclaimers there in that video. We said, look, we're not saying it's going to happen in these 4 years. We just, if this theory of our theory, if that's accurate, then it should fall somewhere in these 4 years. That's all it was. So I know we all want to go home. And I know we're all tired of this world and all the evil and the wickedness and stuff. But, look at it as like just a great honor and blessing that God chose us to live in this time. He could have put us at any point in time. He could have planted you back in the 13th century in some as a serf in some like small town in what is today Moldova or something. Like, I mean, we could have been put at any point in history, but we are the last generation. I am confident of that, sure. And there is so many signs happening right now. It's overwhelming. And I look back at the early, if you go back and look at the books and stuff from the early 90s, from the 80s, from the prophecy guys then, you could write a book and you could basically ride that book for a few years because, things weren't changing that fast. You couldn't do that today. I mean, books, by the time you get it published, I mean, everything has changed already. So I'm editing my new book on the machines that speaks. And I may read through like one chapter on one of these lives. But I had to go back and re-edit all the footnotes on it and stuff. And so I've been doing that this weekend, and it's my eyes are bleeding from just having to go through and look for the footnotes and update all the to make sure the footnotes are cited accurately. They're already cited, but I just kind of did them in order, one per chapter. But I have to do them the first one in chapter 1, and then it keeps going numerically all the way through all the chapters. So then I had to go back and change all that. So it's tedious, but all that to say is that even now, even just within the last couple of months, I mean, there's still things that are happening and changing. Like they just came out, DARPA just came out and said, yeah, cold fusion, we think we can do that, which is huge, right? Anyways, everything is changing so fast with technology, but by the time I publish it, I'm sure that things will have changed 10 more times since then, you know? So, all right, well, that's my monologue for tonight. Let me go into Q&A here. And you saw him on here earlier, guys. If you go check out the Dog-Eared Disciple, man, he has got an excellent program. I've been loving it. And I honestly, David, I don't know if you're still on, but I didn't know you existed. I had no idea who you were. And somehow you just came on my feed one day and I just clicked on and watched it. And I was like, dude, I was just nodding along. I was like, yep, I agree. And so then I went back and watched a lot of your other videos. So he's an excellent, I think I posted his stuff on, I think I posted on Telegram or something. But yeah, so check him out. He's a wealth of knowledge, man. Wealth of knowledge. Hey, there you are. Keep doing what you're doing, man. It's excellent. Love it. And then also Tim Gaines, brother Tim, he's doing his new, I think he's doing the mornings, like a morning kind of news thing. So check out Tim Gaines' new videos that are starting to come out again. And again, I'll be on with Lee Brainard on Friday night, I think 7:30 Central. In Vindog, I don't know if you're on Vin, but I got to get with you. We'll do something here in February. But next week, I think it's next week is February. So I'll be on the 3rd with JB Hixson, but I don't know if that's a record. I think it's a recording, so I don't know when he's going to air that. But all right, I got one of my hairs from my mustache tickling my nose. All right, let's see. And thank you, moderators. Before I forget, thank you guys for collecting all the questions and stuff. Appreciate that. All right. Okay. First one's from Adam Herman Arch. Question, do you think the sonic directed energy weapons used in Venezuela will make armed resistance useless after the rapture? I always wondered about why they didn't care about an armed U.S. populace. Yeah, so they have sonic weapons. They have these microwave weapons, directed energy stuff that they have stuff that in the book I'm writing with Terry James. One of my chapters, I just finished doing it, editing it, was it's called Practical Magic. But it's basically all of these patents that the U.S. Department of Defense holds. And some of these things are like totally science fiction, but you got to think about it. There has to be some type of realism to them in order for them to warrant that patent as theoretically possible. The Navy's inertial mass reduction program, so aircraft basically flying, a patent describes craft traveling through air, water, or space with little or no drag. High energy electromagnetic field generators, devices intended to generate extremely high electromagnetic fields using contained accelerating plasma compression fusion device. Devices, a compact nuclear fusion reactor described as capable of stable fusion within a table-sized chamber. Again, DARPA just came out and said, yeah, fusion, we think that that's possible. The Navy's got a room temperature superconductor. DARPA and space-time engineering concepts have figured out a method and apparatus for converting energy into mass and then back again. Space-time modification weapons, remote influence and neural manipulation patents. So manipulating people, manipulating their brain through, like, you know, pointing a kind of like a directed energy weapon at somebody, but then you can like manipulate their minds. Nervous system manipulation by electromagnetic fields, method of inducing mental, emotional, physical states. I mean, there's all kind of crazy stuff. Propulsion using a quantum vacuum. Anyways, I'm just saying that there's what we're just seeing the very tip of the iceberg when it comes to this stuff. Like, there's some crazy stuff the U.S. has, and you know, whatever the final beast kingdom has, they're going to have access to all of that. So yeah, I don't think your traditional bullets are going to matter much when they can do that. I mean, you saw what they had like 20 Delta Force guys go into Venezuela that like landed on the ground there and basically went through like 100 security officers like they were nothing. Michael Tobert. Hey, Michael. So Michael and I work together, but Michael, don't tell him where we work. But I'm in there fixing my computer in the computer section, and he walks over to me and he's like, "You sure look like somebody that I know." And I'm looking at him like, because I don't really tell people what I do at work. I was like, I don't know. What do you mean? So he walks me back to his computer and he has all my pictures on like Google. I was like, yep, that's me. So anyway, it's very cool to run into another fellow believer there. What do you think redeeming the time for the days are evil means? I think that we need to be busy about whatever it is the Lord's called us to do. And for each of us, that's something different, I'm sure. But being found faithful doing that, because A, you don't know when your last breath is going to be. B, we don't know when the rapture is going to happen. C, I mean, we just don't know. There's so much of what we don't know. So taking advantage, you know, Lee Brainard has that saying, we have one short life to be a good soldier for the Lord, and in a very long eternity to be a fulfilled human being, you know, and we're going to be we're in prison together. But one long eternity to fulfill that perfect desire of the Lord, you know, being the perfect human. So that's what I think it means, taking advantage of the time that you have. From James Wells, what did Jesus mean when he said, hand me and see me, for a spirit has not flesh and bone as you see me have? Why didn't he say flesh and blood? Why there's no blood in the vessel? Yeah, I don't, that whole idea of flesh and bone versus flesh and blood, I don't think in our new glorified bodies we'll have blood, because if you have blood, then you need internal organs. But we know in those glorified bodies, you know, we'll be able to manipulate physical matter, but we won't be constrained by physical matter. We'll be able to presumably travel at the speed of thought, be able to, if I wanted to go see the bottom of the ocean, I could just go down there. I couldn't do that with internal organs that are, you know, and I don't know I'm not trying to claim to know the physics of everything, you know, being under high pressure situations like water or in space or whatever, but it doesn't seem like we would have internal organs like that. Thus, we would not need blood. But it's a good catch. I hadn't thought about that in a while. And from James again, I don't know if I can ask a second one, but did the 500 witnesses witness the ascension or just the 12? I think the 500 saw Christ in his resurrected form in various points or places in the numerous times he appeared. And I think that, I don't know, I think it was probably just the 12, or, you know, just a number of the disciples, plus there were the women that were there with him. But a number of people did see him ascend. but he was seen by at least 500 people during all the times that he appeared after his resurrection. Okay. Princess Dispenser. What is Trump doing with the $1 billion buy-in from each country in his new Trump Board of Peace? You know, I meant to talk about that tonight and I just forgot. So the whole Board of Peace thing, initially, when I first heard about this, I guess when this was floated, back in November, early December, I think it was November, I was just thinking that this was dealing with Gaza, but it sounds like, at least from the signing ceremony there at Davos and everything that's come out from there, this is going to be like a replacement of the United Nations, in my opinion. I think they've got 30 nations on board right now. And in order for the $1 billion, you have to pay $1 billion to get a permanent seat on there. I think what Trump is doing is he's looking at the failures of both the League of Nations and the United Nations and saying, you know, we need the movers and the shakers. It's fine in theory to have the whole world have some type of representation, you know, but not all nations are obviously created equal. They obviously all have different agendas. A lot of them are very anti-American agendas. So we are not really looking at that. We are looking at people that can make it happen. And I think, again, this is one of those aspects of Satan trying to get some type of, you know, not universal, but global government system in line before the rapture of the church, because he knows that the United Nations is a dumpster fire. And when a global crisis like that, they don't have the means to make things happen. They don't have the means now to enforce anything. They're just a squawk box. You know, they just go in there and debate on stuff. Trump is putting together this, could be the formation or the prototype of what like the 10 Kings will be. And these will be nations that have the means and the ability to make things happen. And that's what Satan needs. And same thing with like why he has Trump in power. Look, Democrats are great at destroying things, and they're great at corrupting the system and inducing fraud, waste, and abuse. But they are not innovators. They're not inventors and creators like the entrepreneurial types that drift towards Republican sides. So you have donors that donate to the Democrat Party, like Jeff Bezos and those guys, but they're doing that for political means. That when it comes to the bottom dollar, they're going to go to whichever party supports, keeps them wealthy, you know. And having a guy like Trump drive the train the way he's driving it to get all this stuff done and built. I mean, you couldn't have Biden do that. Kamala Harris wouldn't do that. So whatever that $1 billion is, the buy-in that gives them a permanent seat, is going to some type of fund that they'll have in case something happens. They have the means and the ability to action it. And so that to me makes the most sense. And I also heard too that not only is Trump building the new ballroom, I think it was in the East Wing or the West Wing. No, I think it's in the East Wing. But he's also redoing the bunkers under the White House, completely renovating the bunkers. And it's super top secret. So interesting to hear that the whole ballroom thing is kind of a distraction for what they're doing under the bunkers and stuff. That's pretty interesting. From Patrick Hart, the legs of iron extend to the feet of iron and clay without a break. Does this suggest that the Roman Empire is still active in some form? If no, what explains the gap? So I think that the Roman Empire has existed from, you know, it's BC times, you know, as it was going through the different versions of the Roman Empire before it became a imperial empire. It was a republic. It was a triumvirate. It was a, you know, it had a lot of different iterations prior to it before Julius Caesar took over. And even after Rome, the western leg of the Rome kind of collapsed, they had already shifted their assets, and a lot of the bulk of the Roman Empire had shifted to Constantinople. And obviously we know that as the Byzantine empires, but the Byzantines called themselves Romans, and they went on for another 1,000 years. And then during that time, the Western leg kind of reinvented itself under the guise of the Holy Roman Empire in the 800s, or 800, in fact, with Charlemagne. So then the 800s, from the 800s forward, you had what the Germans considered the First Reich, which went from 800 to the 1800s. The Second Reich was from the 1840s or 1860s up until the end of the First World War. And that's why Hitler called his reign of terror the Third Reich. So from just at least the Germans' standpoint, they always viewed themselves as part of that Roman Empire, or an iteration of it. Then you had the French, then you had all the different kingdoms that kind of rose and fell during that time. The Spanish, the Dutch, the French, the Germans, the British. The British Empire lasted for a couple hundred years. And then we came out of all of those countries and our own version of an extension of Rome, as I can put it that way. I mean, Western civilization is largely just a mix-up of the Judeo-Christian worldview paired up with the Greco-Roman system of governance, and which is what has allowed the Western civilization to flourish, while the Eastern civilization has been kind of mired one after the other with dictators and potentates and czars and kings and whatnot. So, but yeah, the Romans, I very much see that even the way our system of governments is set up is very ties back to Greco-Roman philosophy and governance and how we set our political systems up together and the laws and things like that. So I think that the Rome has continued on in one way, shape, or form or another, and we'll see a revived, like a Roman Empire 2.0 after the collapse of the United States, if that's the way it plays out. There is a small group that believe that America is Mystery Babylon, and I mean I could see that if we're reading like Revelation 17 and 18, if we're reading that as a summary of like, or particularly Revelation 17, if we see that as a summary, like, how a pastor may preach a message and at the end of the message, he summarizes everything. Well, this is what I talked about. And he kind of goes back through everything he talked about. If that's the way it is, then we could see the U.S. as a collapse, or we could see the U.S. as like mystery, Babylon in mystery form. I don't know. I mean, I'm not super dogmatic on certain things like that because I simply don't know. And I think you could argue the point any number of ways, and there's no way any of us can prove it until it plays out. So, good question. Thank you, Patrick. From Straight Up, God decides, but when I hear the rapture may well be in 10 years, I wonder if that's even likely with the rapid setup of the B system so far. Or do you really think it's 10 years is reasonable? I think obviously anything is possible. So again, I've shared this so many times already, but like, when I first really started looking at the timing of things, it was like around 2009. And it was Don Koenig's article, When Will Christ Return? Which I've shared that again numerous times. And he had a table with all of the different theories out there, and he had everyone, every theory, every popular, well-known theory about when the people speculated on when the Lord was going to return. And then he did, the general timeframes that they were looking at, and then he kind of did like a weighted table, as it were, and he goes down to the bottom and he takes the average. And so his average for the second coming, not the rapture, was somewhere in the mid 2030s. Again, this was like 2009. I think he wrote the article in 2007. I read it in 2009. And so the way he laid everything out, I was like, wow, that makes sense, And so my hope then was that there would be a big gap. If the second coming was, say, in 2035, and it wasn't done on any particular thing, it was just the average. It was like an average of all the dates, the second coming dates, and he took that as an average, right? So if 2035, then we know 7 years, if you back that up, it would be 2020, 2028 would be the rapture. And so from that time going forward, I always viewed the rapture as being at least in the 2020s. And you got to remember, we had in 2011, we had a big rapture craze that went through the ranks there, because 2011 was 7 years from 2018, which was the 70th birthday of Israel. We had the blood moon calendar, or not the blood moon, the Mayan calendar thing in 2012. We had the blood moon tetrads in 2013, 2014, or was it 2014, 2015? Then we had the 2017. We had all these different high watch times where everybody's getting spun up thinking it was the rapture, and everybody had really good justifications for those things. We've all seen them come and go. So, I mean, Tyler and I's theory is just what it is. It's a theory that we looked at, and you guys can go back and watch that video. We lay it all out. Very simple. It's a very simple theory. It's not complicated at all. And we said, this is what we're thinking, and obviously this time could come and go, and we're here in the final year of it, so I'm not going to write it off until January 1st of 2027. But with that said, I for 20 years looked at, or not 20 years, almost 20 years, I looked at the rapture as being in the late 2020s and the second coming being the 2030s. So it's a view I've held for a very long time, and it feels weird that we're in it now. We're in that kind of window. It feels it feels bizarre to me, but I don't know. I hope. I mean, I'm like everybody else here. I don't have I can't look into the future. I can just look what we have, the evidence that we have, and make kind of educated guesses on those things. So to me, 10 years on the outset is at the very latest. Would be at the very, very latest. But I think that given the speed at which things are being built up now, it would be hard. It'd be very hard to see even 5 years goes by without the rapture. But again, I don't have a crystal ball. From Patricia, do you expect New York City to be the next Minneapolis? I think if these Democrat mayors and governors, I don't know. So Trump now is trying to work with Tim Walz on really focusing their efforts on just going after the criminal elements. But I think that may be in conjunction to tamper things down, the tone down a little bit, without having to pull the Insurrection Act. Without having to pull that card. But at the same time, I think he's putting other cities and stuff on notice as well. And they're seeing other cities are watching this thinking, okay, well, Trump is not, he's not playing nice with these people. Like, he's willing to go in there and do what he needs to do to get it done. Now, are they going to get every one of them out? I don't know. I think if Tim Walz works with him and gets all the folks out of their jails, gets all the folks that they know are criminal elements, as simultaneously you've got DOJ going after all these people on these signal chats that have been orchestrating these insurrection acts kind of things, or insurgent acts. And they're also dealing with the fraud. They're dealing with, so there's multifaceted in Minnesota, and it'll be multifaceted in pretty much every Democrat-run city and state. Whether they're talking about Chicago or Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York City. I mean, it's cleaning house, and it's going to get uglier before it gets better. But I do think that New York City, he's looking at, Mom Donnie is looking to set up his street creds in the Democrat Party by playing tough against Trump. But I don't think that's going to work. And he's already, in New York City is like $12 billion in the hole in their budget, and he's already facing insurmountable problems that he can't even handle right now without even the ICE agents being there, without Trump even really focusing attention on New York City. But it'll be interesting for sure. Straight up 11, looks like you're maintaining your weight loss and new muscle. What is the current regime you're implementing? Well, I don't know. I put on like 5 pounds this weekend just because I haven't really done anything. I can't go anywhere. Basically you just calorie deficit. So figure out what your calorie number is. So like if it should go like 3, like a, what's the word? If you're sitting around all day, you're not doing a lot, you'll have a calorie. Here's what you need to maintain your weight doing the very minimum. Here's what you do if you need to maintain your weight at a semi-active day. And then here's what you do if you're at a very active day. So you'll have 3 different numbers there. And it'll be based off of your height, your weight, your age. And so if say your calorie deficit on a semi-active day is 2,500 calories. So let's say you weigh 200 pounds and you want to stay 200 pounds, you have to maintain at least that minimum calorie of, let's say it's 2,500 calories. And if you just come in every day underneath that calorie number, you're going to start losing weight by default without doing anything if you just maintain your calories. And the best way to maintain your calories is just simply to go to a high protein diet. You don't have to go completely carnivore. You can go ketovore, so you can mix vegetables and stuff, but basically you're just cutting out the carbs. Because your body's the easiest thing for your body to burn is carbs. So if you feed yourself a bunch of carbs with protein, it's gonna go through the carbs first instead of burning fat. It'll go through the carbs and the proteins, and then it'll go through the fat the last. So if you take away the carbs and you maintain a high protein diet, then the only thing it has left to pull energy from is your fat. So then that way you start losing fat. So yeah, you can, if you maintain that calorie deficit, whatever that is for you, stay in a calorie deficit and then just go to a high protein, low carb diet. I think everybody here would be, and I'm not saying everybody here needs to do it. I'm just saying if you simply applied that very simple principle, you would be losing weight by default. And that means cutting out, fast food and sodas and things like that too. But from Brooke, do you think Minnesota issues are a distraction for something bigger? No, I think Minnesota has been kind of a, excuse the phrase, like a pissing contest between, really what Tim Walz did there is insurrection. Inciting people to stand up against the federal government is insurrection. And it's going to cost them. But the fraud, I think, is where they're really trying to target in, and a lot of the illegal activities that have been going to benefit the Somali community there, that they've been sending money back, hundreds of millions of dollars back to Somalia that goes to fund terrorism with Al-Shabaab and all those groups there. So I don't know. I think that they just tried to bow up to the federal government. The government said, no, you're not going to do that. And I think Tim Walz knows he's in a big trouble in a very big way. So he's probably trying to find some way out to lessen the blow that's going to happen to him for all the fraud, waste, and abuse and corruption and all that stuff that's going on. From Dog-Eared Disciple, do you think this business with Canada is going to push Alberta to declare either independence or to ask to join the U.S.? Yeah, I've been watching all of those states, Alberta, Manitoba, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan have been holding votes. And I think it was Alberta they just had the most recent referendum to vote for independence. I don't know that they would become part of the United States, but I do think that they could easily become like a protectorate of the United States, like Puerto Rico is, or Guam, or some of these other territories that even Greenland now is going to be. I think that Greenland will end up becoming some type of protectorate of the United States. So I don't think we want them as a state necessarily, because even like the conservatives in Canada are far more, and I'm not saying that they are, this is what I've heard, that they're kind of more liberal than say are kind of, they're probably like we would call Republican light in a way. So a lot of Republicans don't necessarily want them to join as a 51st or 52nd, 53rd, 54th, depending on how many of those provinces decide to join, territories decide to join. But I definitely think that they can maintain their independence and then have a very special relationship with the United States in a way that separates them from Ottawa. But, does Ottawa let them go? I mean, how does that work? I don't know, because I thought they were still part of the British Empire. It'll be interesting, but I do ultimately think that if you look back to the maps of the U.S., Club of Rome, those kinds of things, it has basically, all of North America from Mexico all the way up to Greenland as part of this North American region. We know in the 90s, Clinton's tried to do NAFTA. I guess they did NAFTA. And, so there's already been a long standing intent to kind of blur the lines between all of us. But I can easily see them declaring their independence and that the U.S. supporting that or recognizing them. And then they become a protectorate of the United States, and that we guarantee their security, until they're able to get established and, whatever the case is, but we'll have some type of special relationship with them. But, Mark Carney is proven to be not as tough as he thinks he is, one. And number two, he used to be the president of the Bank of England. So he's all tied up in that old world elite mentality thinking. And taking out Venezuela, we also began targeting a lot of the offshore banking stuff going on there in the Caymans and the Turcos and Caicos and Turks and all the places that have offshore banking, because, that's something that the British started back in the 1960s, which funnels almost $400 billion in narco-terrorism money. So, we had all those ships down there. They weren't just sitting in the water. They're collecting data. Every time we took out a drug boat, people were making phone calls. So then we have the radio equipment. I don't want to get too technical on that, but with the capabilities they have, they're able to figure out who's calling who, what they're saying, and who's the players and shakers and the movers. And so a lot of data collection was going on in the Caribbean while we had all those ships down there. So I think I could see them breaking away, declaring their independence, and then immediately having the U.S. recognize them and have a special type of protectorate type of relationship with them. I don't think they necessarily want to become part of the United States, but they definitely don't want to be beholden to Ottawa anymore. All right, from Marine Mom, do you think that we are too spread out militarily? What are possible disadvantages we have regarding Iran? I don't think we are too spread out right now. I think we were very over leveraged for a long time, especially in the 20 years that I was in. And we had people everywhere, but certainly that is a nightmare scenario where, let's say that, back before Russia invaded Ukraine, I posited an idea that, if this is a domino type effect where we know that Putin and Xi Jinping met together in February before he invaded Ukraine at the Winter Olympics. And I think he was telling them, hey, this is what we got to do. And he got China's not blessing, but kind of a mutual concurrence, I guess is the best way to think of it. But at the time, I was thinking, well, what if Russia invades Ukraine and at the same time China invades Taiwan or begins an assault on Taiwan? China could very easily unleash Kim Jong-un, who could then launch attacks into South Korea. You would have the U.S. spread into 2 different theaters, and even in the Pacific theater would be divided into between what's going on in Korea versus what's going on down there with Taiwan. We would absolutely be spread. That would be a nightmare scenario that then Iran at that point could then launch or do something. Not necessarily against Israel, but we saw that they launched an attack on Saudi Arabia's oil refineries back in 2019, I think. Saudi Arabia is incredibly vulnerable to Iran, incredibly vulnerable. So I would think that they would hit Saudi Arabia first before they hit anybody else, and really just took out the leadership there, or their oil refineries capability, because then that would skyrocket the price of oil and stuff. It would be catastrophic. So, but now, Russia has been bled dry basically in Ukraine. China is going through some serious turmoil with their military leadership and their capabilities and competency. Like, they've made a bunch of ships, but their stuff is like Temu, it's like knockoff. Half of it doesn't work. Their missile, the general that was in charge of all their missiles, a lot of their missiles, they didn't even have fuel in their missiles. They had water. Yeah, China is not as bad as we think they are. They have a huge army, but the logistics of getting them from point A to point B, especially over the Pacific, they would never make it. The U.S. would just destroy their ships before they ever made it over there. But they are a huge threat to Taiwan, especially with their drone capabilities. But I don't think we're definitely in a better place now than we were a few years ago. I mean, recruitment across the board is way, way up. I mean, it is like way up under Hegseth and Secretary of War now. Their recruitment is through the roof now. They weren't even making their numbers during the Biden years. They couldn't make their recruiting numbers. So I don't think we're as in bad a shape now than we were even a couple of years ago. So in terms of what they want to do with Iran, man, I don't know. I don't know what game they're playing there. I think ultimately, they've decided on regime change. So if they can get this Reza Shah Pahlavi in place, and they can take out the Ayatollah as well as the leadership in the IRGC, I don't know. I think they're trying to figure out how to hurt them what's the best way to hurt them without either turning the population against the U.S. or making things worse. So I really don't know. But Trump's also got the leadership down there in Saudi Arabia and probably UAE and Abu Dhabi and Bahrain and Oman saying, hey, if you launch an attack on them, they're just going to attack us and wipe our industry out. That's going to drive the oil prices through the roof. It's going to cause all kind of global economic chaos. So I think that's part of it. But Israel right now, I know for sure, is taking out Hezbollah. And so they're trying to get rid of that extension. They basically neutralized the Houthis. We haven't heard much of the Houthis as of late. And Hamas obviously is in tatters. So it's hard to say what's going to play out exactly with Iran. We know they're a factor. They are a role. They play a role in Gog Magog. To what extent, I don't know. It's hard to say, and especially if the Shah takes over again. It seems impossible right now, but they are stated as being a role player in that. And so whether that's a small faction of their IRGC marches with all of the other stand countries, march west against Israel, or if their government is still in place at that time, something changes. There's a big game changer that happens that draws them back into that conflict. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Oh, thanks. That was all the questions. I saw a question earlier. I think I started. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, I know what it was. Somebody had emailed me about the Al Fa port in Iraq. I think that was you, Melody. I could not find your email, but I did see your question early on when I first came on, and I am familiar with that port that they're building there. Let me see. Let me pull it up again. Share screen. All right. So this is the Alpha Grand Port. So yeah, they are doing dredging operations there. So basically, you know, it's all kind of sand and it's silt and all that stuff that ships were not able to go up there. So they're doing all these dredging operations, but it's only like 14 miles. I know Andy Woods is really big on this being Babylon being back in Iraq, but again, here's the traditional site of Babylon. This is Baghdad right up there, so it's, I forget how many miles. It's 400 miles or something. I've actually flown from here. Where were we? Wherever the U.S. base is. There's a couple of bases here. Anyways, yeah, we flew from here all the way in Blackhawks all the way up through to Mosul, and then from Mosul over to Tal Afar, right here. That's where I spent the bulk of my time. So I honestly, I don't see that being, I don't know how that plays out, but you're talking about from here all the way up to here. Now, let me just caveat that and say this. Somebody else had emailed me and made a pretty good point. They could be watching it on their smartphones, right? They could be watching it on iPads or whatever. I don't know. Even if they're looking at the smoke of the city burning, I just don't see how ship masters and people on ships could see from down here, from the port down all the way over to where the city of Babylon would be rebuilt. Now, another caveat could be that if we're talking about the empire, the Babylonian Empire, and there's a city built somewhere within the Babylonian Empire, it technically would still be in the Babylon, part of Babylon, but not where the actual ancient city was. There's nothing there. Even if they could build a port, why would they build the port all the way up to there? There's nothing there. I mean, right now there's nothing there. I mean, you're right. Could be something there down the road. But let's just play this out. If they decided to build this port out, let me pull this back up. If they decided to build this port out, you're talking at the pace they're going right now, 10 years. Easy. And then you're talking about building the infrastructure here to make this worthy of being like the world's trade center, economic center, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you're talking a long time. So even beyond, let's say the rapture happened tomorrow, and you're talking even by the end of 7 years, I don't think that could be built up. Now, that's just me looking at it this side of the rapture. So I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. And I'm not saying that it has to make sense to me. It could happen because the Bible says it's going to happen that way, or we're looking at the wrong Babylon. So I'm just telling you, there's nothing there. It's and it's way too far from the coast to be seen just due to the curvature of the earth. There is a dry canal being built from the port all the way to Syria and Turkey. Oh man, I have not seen that. Even Neom, if you look at Neom, I mean, I thought, because Neom used to be part of the old Babylonian Empire. I thought that was a contender. Here's Neom right here. Somewhere over here is Neom. This to me makes a lot more sense that wherever Neom is, let me look The Saudi Arabia. Well, that's not helpful. Airport. Anyways, they just, I saw an article earlier today that they started slowing down on building that. They're basically running out of money. They're running to all kinds of like construction issues and problems. So they're trying to lower expectations. Mohammed bin Salman is trying to lower people's expectations. Like, yeah, it's going to take a little bit longer than what we thought. And it's probably not going to be as high speed as we thought. And, you know, so, hey, I spent a year there too. Like, yeah, those guys, at least the Army, like they couldn't fight their way out of a wet paper bag. So I don't put a whole lot of, I've seen how they build things. So I'm not that impressed with their construction. We also know that if you look at, you know, Revelation 3, where it talks about where Satan's throne is in Pergamum. I mean, well, Pergamum's like up in Turkey. So I don't know. It seems to me that Satan's throne can move over time. It may have been in Babylon at one time. It may be it was in Pergamum at one time. It could be in London now. It could be, I mean, it could shift places. So again, you know what? I know Andy's just going by the book, and he's not wrong. He is absolutely not wrong for just taking it for what it says, because I do that with most stuff too. There's some stuff that, again, is like that hasn't happened yet, and it's still future to us, and we just don't know. We think we know, but at least looking at it today, and having been there and seeing what it's going to take for that to look like that at some point in the future, to me, that seems like something 20, 30 years out. But he could be right. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying I have a hard time seeing it. That's all I'm saying. So I am very much agnostic on Babylon being ancient Babylon versus being Rome. I have a hard time with it being Rome too, and even New York City necessarily. I don't know. Trust me, I've wrestled with this for so long. All right. Well, hey guys, thank you for tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, the Iraqi army was almost as bad as the ANA troops. Yeah, those guys are something else. Anyways, thank you guys for hanging out tonight. Again, I'll be on Friday with Lee Brainard, 7:30 on his channel, SoothKeep. So check us out then. Check out Dog-Eared Disciple. Vin, we need to get together. Or email me some dates. I think you were going to email me some dates, and we'll see what we can work out. Thank you, Carrie Nelson. That is very generous of you. Thank you. Thank you guys for hanging out. Please stay warm. The cold's going to stay here all week, I think, and then it's going to be as cold next weekend. So I don't think we'll have the precipitation, but please take care of your pets. Keep them inside if you can. Keep them warm. Stay warm yourselves. Be careful driving and all that stuff. But keep looking up, because you know, it could be this year, and it could be tomorrow. It could be tonight. We don't know. We have no idea when the Lord's are going to return. We just know it's soon. We know we're in the season. So that's good enough for me. I would love for it to be tonight. As Andy would say, there's not a problem that I have that the rapture couldn't solve. So, you know, we all want that. But in the meantime, we stay busy about the Lord's work. Keep doing what he's called us to do. Keep sharing the gospel. Keep being the salt and light in your circle of influence, wherever that may be. And keep telling people about the rapture. So even if they don't believe you and they don't want to receive the gospel, at least they've heard the rapture from you, so that when it does happen, they might believe. that, you know, take that same principle that Christ did. He's like, I tell you these things ahead of time so that when it happens, you'll believe what I said. And so take that same principle and carry it forward to the rapture. Even if they're rejecting the gospel now, or they're just not in it right now or into it or want to talk about it, at least they've heard you say the rapture, explained what it was, so that if it happens, be like, oh man, that could be that wake up moment for them. And I'll be very, very surprised. I think we'll all be very surprised with the amount of people that we've all told personally about the rapture. How many of those people, after it happens, will come to faith in Christ because of that? So I think the rapture is a very powerful evangelistic tool. And it's one of those things you keep in your toolkit. You can, when you're sharing the gospel or doing a Bible study, whatever, when you're teaching on whatever it is you're teaching, don't forget to leave out, I mean, don't neglect leaving out prophecy. I found that in all the audiences I've ever spoken to, from prisoners to students to whoever, this is something that people are interested in, right? They're interested in the future. They want to know what the Bible has to say about it. So it's one of the most powerful tools that we have, because we have the only book in all the world that knows what's going to happen next. And I think we neglect it to our detriment. So all that to say this. So good night, guys. Maranatha. Love you. And we'll talk to you soon.